Gravitational Pull by Kenneth Matthews. The year 1972. Jordan Harte gazed at the ceiling open-mouthed, unable to comprehend what he was looking at. There was a gaping hole in the kitchen ceiling and the roof above, through which he could see clouds scudding across a leaden sky. His mind raced at the importance of the success of his experiment started to dawn on him, the enormous implications of it all. It had just started out as an experiment with magnets. A thought hadn't occurred to Jordan as he slept. The thought had been so real he had wakened and scribbled a note in the pad which he kept on the bedside table, a habit acquired in childhood. What made this dream so vivid was the posing of a question that he thought he knew the answer to, yet the dream challenged that conventional thinking with a solution that seemed so real and simple. Waking in the morning, the first thing Jordan did was reach for his notepad. Had it all been a dream? Or had his mind devised an answer to a question that scientific thinking decreed was not possible? He had stared at his overnight scribblings, barely 3 sentences, yet seemingly so feasible he had to try it out. Jordan continued to gaze at the ceiling, the result of his experiment, his knees starting to shake. He reached behind him for a chair and sat down, becoming aware of the shouting from the next room as his wife Mary tried to find out the cause of the loud bang. What on earth is going on in there? Jordan shook his head as he waved his hands, trying to disperse the dust from the fallen plaster. The door flew open and Mary charged into the room, looking around frantically, sneezing as she breathed in the dust. There was a peculiar smell in the air, a mixture of electricity and something her mind couldn't define. There was a mixture of anger tinged with relief that Jordan was all right as she screamed, "What the hell have you done now?" Jordan was in a state of shock himself. Despite doing the experiment, he had not considered the possibilities of what might happen should it prove successful. The experiment vanishing through the ceiling and the roof as Jordan's experimental device disappeared through the fabric of the building at unimaginable speed and with an explosive force that bewildered him. Mary looked at her dazed husband as a thud from the piece of plaster ceiling hit the glass on the table and landed at her feet. She was dumbfounded. Jordan turned and looked at Mary, his eyes shining. Well, it actually worked. Mary was in a state of shock as she looked around the kitchen, gazing at the debris at her feet. Automatically, she kneeled down and started to pick up the wreckage scattered around the room. Jordan, meanwhile, was also in a state of shock, but his thoughts were very different from those of his wife as he turned to her triumphantly. You do realise what this means, don't you? We're going to be rich and famous. He leaned over to help his wife to her feet, and she pushed him away, her eyes blazing with rage as tears ran down her face. You could have killed us all, she raged, striking at him feebly with her fists, sobbing as she did so. I thought there'd been an earthquake. What the hell have you done to our beautiful house? Look at the ceiling! She broke down in a flood of tears as she wailed, "Look at the roof!" Jordan Harte worked in a college as a general administrator, a job he was well suited for, as he had a very logical mind. It was the same natural logic he possessed that had led him to this moment. His inventive mind always saw possibilities when faced with a problem, no matter how bizarre. Apart from his current project, he'd been talking to Mary about the possibility that the current trend towards militarization would eventually lead to blind people being fitted with tiny TV cameras, tapped into the patient's neural network, allowing them to see again. The idea appealed to Mary, but she's shaking her head. Jordan was such a dreamer. Jordan was always to be found when he had nothing better to do, in the college library reading the latest scientific journals. What had initiated his latest inspiration was an article on miniaturization he'd just read in a scientific journal, where scientists were predicting all manner of things in the near future, their ramblings sounding more like science fiction than fact. Among the many predictions being uttered included such things as handheld wireless telephones and robots taking the place of people in factories, releasing the workers to have more leisure time. Well, the shriek of anger directed at him by Mary brought Jordan back down to earth with a bump. But his flight of fancy dissipated with a single word. He stared at her, looked around the room, then gazed up to where Mary was pointing, the hole in the roof. He muttered, "I'll get it sorted." In 1972, the government had set up a new body called the National Research Council with the aim of making Britain great again. The premise being that ordinary inventors working away in their garden sheds or front rooms would bring their projects to fruition hand in glove with the help of the new government. Quasi-autonomous non-governmental organisation, or as they came to be known, Quangos. As was the way with any government initiative, they filled it with stuff they wanted to get rid of from other departments and added a sprinkling of self-declared experts, along with several tiers of management. Nevertheless, the initiative did grab the public imagination. Jordan had been one of the many to be seduced by the offer of government cash and expert help offered by the National Research Council. His current project started when he watched a demonstration on how to make a magnet. The presentation had started him thinking about magnetism and the fact that if two magnets were placed one above the other with like poles facing, it demonstrated anti-gravity, or at least the cancellation of gravity. It was not then a great stretch of his imagination to think that magnetism could be utilised further. Would it be possible that he could use the known qualities of magnetism to make an anti-gravity machine? A machine that not only cancelled out the effects of gravity, but a machine that would also stimulate movement. After all, magnetism was already producing movement in electrical motors and countless other things. To Jordan Harte's mind, a logical extension of these inventions was using anti-gravity itself as a motor. He was aware scientific thinking was sceptical of such a concept. However, scientists had once thought that the Earth was the centre of the universe. Jordan was not one to believe people who were satisfied that their thoughts were holy writ, when there was always the question, what if you're wrong? He looked up at the hole in the ceiling again and nodded his head in satisfaction. You are wrong. With the kitchen back in some sort of order and repairs to the roof and ceiling arranged with a friend of theirs, Jordan and Mary finally sat down in the living room with a cup of tea for Mary and coffee for Jordan. They sat there for a few moments, gazing into their cups, before Mary raised the question of Jordan's experiment. Not the hysterical screamed questions Mary had asked in the first heated moments of seeing the damage to the house, but measured, sensible questions. She looked at him quizzically. Did that gadget really do that? He nodded. Jordan wanted to smile, but was afraid to show his triumph. Yeah. Jordan couldn't hold back a triumphant smile any longer as he answered. The damn thing really did it. It worked. And the power. His mouth fell open in astonishment when he realized the power generated by the device. I could not believe my eyes. It just went straight up like a rocket. 1 second and it was gone, just disappeared. And when you consider how tiny those magnets were. He was staggered as he looked up at the ceiling again, thinking of the power generated by the tiny magnets. His voice trailed away into silence, his mind racing as he asked, I'm going to have to do something about it. Who do I contact? How do I go about it? Do you think anyone will believe me? He paused before answering his question and looking at the ceiling. Well, they'll bloody well have to when they see this and see it work. Mary, ever the practical one, voiced concerns that started to come to mind. She was the eternal pessimist, with Jordan, the optimist. What if someone tried to steal your invention if it's that good? Also, where has the thing gone? What goes up must come down. Jordan stared at her, speechless. Of the two questions, what worried him most at that point in time was, where is it? Did it hit someone? As for the question of someone stealing his idea, that was something Jordan will definitely have to look into. But where would he find the answers? The library? Mary watched the wheels rotate in her husband's mind as paranoia started. She could imagine wheels within wheels, thoughts rejected, others considered. She smiled to herself. Jordan was such an open person, so readable. Mary decided to help his thought process along. What about this thing the government have set up for inventors? The National Research thing. Could they help at all? Kathleen Hawley was hanging out the washing on a small back garden as her 2-year-old son Trevor was on his knees digging in the garden with a soup spoon. One spoonful turned up an earthworm, which struggled to bury back into the earth as Trevor lifted it and examined it closely. Satisfied the worm was interesting, he put it into his mouth, spitting it out again immediately as his face signalled his distaste at the wriggling morsel. Kathleen looked at her son as she heard him spitting, his distaste evident at the sound of his disgust. She could see the circle of brown mud round her son's lips, which told her he'd been eating mud again. Sighing, she took her handkerchief from her apron pocket to wipe his mouth when she became aware of a strange, unearthly, highly pitched sound which made the hackles on the back of her neck rise in fear. She looked up into the sky to detect where the eerie, keening sound was coming from, releasing a small amount of urine into her pants, as there was a loud thud, accompanied by the earth fountaining up to create a small crater just a few feet away from Treasure. Oh my God! Kathleen almost passed out with fright. Moments later, her motherly instincts took over as she rushed to protect her son from whatever nightmare had invaded her garden. Scooping him up, she rushed into the house and slammed the door, locking it for extra security.